If I touch your son, he will stop crying in 10 seconds.
Passengers demanded the baby be removed.
If I touch
An
your son,
emergency landing was minutes away. Then, from economy class, a teenage boy no one noticed walked into first class. No ticket, no permission, and said, "If I touch your son, his crying will stop in 10 seconds." Everyone laughed, until the countdown began. But to understand why a billionaire would trust his only child to a stranger no one knew, and why Owen Ross was the only person capable of saving that baby, we must return to where this journey truly began. 6 hours earlier, in two very different worlds destined to collide. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The glass walls of George Courtney's penthouse overlooked the sleeping skyline like a king surveying his silent dominion. 3 monitors lit the dark room, reflecting across his sharp features as he finalized a takeover worth $14.2 billion. "Proceed with the acquisition at market open," he said into his headset, voice steady, controlled. "If the board resists, remind them I own 40% of their voting shares." On another screen, global news outlets were already preparing the headline, "Courtney strikes again, largest private deal in U.S. history." He ended the call and glanced at his watch. 4:07 a.m. Behind him, a soft cry broke the silence. "Will." George turned, irritation flickering across his face. The nanny was supposed to arrive an hour ago. But she wouldn't. His wife, Alessandra, had taken their primary nanny to Geneva for a UNICEF summit. The backup had called in sick. A third had refused last-minute travel due to a family emergency. "It's just one day," George muttered, lifting Will into his arms with the stiffness of a man holding something fragile yet foreign. "How hard can this be?" The baby began to fuss. George checked his phone. 19 unread emails, 2 missed calls from Tokyo, 1 from Riyadh. He had mastered world markets. He had outmaneuvered government regulators. But in that moment, watching his son's face scrunch and redden, George Courtney felt something alien, helplessness. He strapped Will into the designer stroller and told himself it would be fine. A quick commercial flight to meet Alessandra in Paris, one night in the Ritz, then hand the baby back. After all, he was George Courtney, and George Courtney never lost control. Thousands of miles and a lifetime away, 14-year-old Owen Ross folded 2 shirts into a frayed backpack. His entire life fit into less than 10 pounds. "Do you have everything, Owen?" asked Miss Daniels, the shelter coordinator. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice remained firm. Owen nodded. "Just need to stop by the clinic before the airport." Miss Daniels hesitated. Everyone knew why he was stopping there. The baby ward. A 4-month-old infant had been screaming non-stop since midnight. The hospital had tried everything. Nothing worked. They had called for Owen at 2:00 a.m. He walked into the clinic, placed his palm on the baby's tiny chest, closed his eyes. Within minutes, silence. Not sleep, peace. Now, as he zipped his backpack, he reached into his pocket and gently unfolded a letter. The ink was smudged from the day it was handed to him. London International Institute of Pediatric Sciences. You have been selected as the sole recipient of the Horizon Humanitarian Scholarship for Undocumented Medical Talent. They didn't call him a doctor. They couldn't. He had no degree, no official training, no credentials, only a gift. A gift his mother, a neonatal nurse from Ghana, had passed down during her final days battling leukemia. "Babies don't speak with words," she had whispered between labored breaths. "They speak with rhythm. If you match it, their pain surrenders." And in that moment, Owen had made a promise over her fading heartbeat. "I will carry this gift. I will not let it die with you. Now he wasn't flying to London for glory. He was going to prove to the world that healing didn't come only from machines, medicine, or money. It could come from human touch, ancestral memory, heartbeat against heartbeat. Two men, one defined by control, the other by compassion, boarded the same plane that morning, one running from weakness, the other walking toward destiny. Neither could know that before they landed, the sky would test them both, and only one would know how to answer. The plane leveled out above the Atlantic, but peace never came. Baby Will's scream sliced through the cabin, raw and primal, shattering any illusion of luxury. His face was flushed with heat, tiny fists trembling with each desperate cry. George Courtney held him stiffly, bouncing in awkward motions. The formula bottle had been refused. The designer blanket, embroidered with Will's initials, had been kicked away. Even the pediatric soothing app, custom-made by a Harvard neuroscientist, had failed to produce results. First-class passengers, once politely tolerant, began turning with open hostility. "Is he going to cry the whole flight?" a woman hissed, her hands clamped over her ears. "I paid $8,000 for this seat," another muttered, glaring at George. "Get control of your kid." A man in a gray suit not so subtly angled his phone, recording the chaos. A billionaire, powerless. A crying baby, a plane full of witnesses. George could feel his identity fracturing with each scream. He was the man who solved everything. He had stared down world leaders and market crashes without blinking. But staring into his own son's tear-streaked face, his confidence collapsed into something terrifying. What if I can't do this? What if I was never meant to be a father? The flight attendant leaned in, voice low, a script struggling to remain professional. "Mr. Courtney, perhaps walking him up the aisle again?" "I've walked him," George's voice cracked. "I've walked him 23 times. She hesitated, glancing around at the passengers filming. "If you can't get him settled soon, regulations may require—" George didn't let her finish. He pressed Will against his shoulder and started pacing the aisle, his polished shoes silent on the carpet. The baby only screamed louder. Meanwhile, in economy class, Owen Ross closed his eyes and inhaled slowly. Each of Will's cries reverberated through his bones, not as noise, but as rhythm. Erratic, jagged, frantic. "That's not a normal cry," he thought, tightening his grip on his backpack. "That is nervous system distress." His lips moved silently. 3 counts in. Hum on the exhale. Steady pulse. It was the breathing cadence his mother had taught him, the one that allowed him to feel what a baby's body was trying to communicate. Owen opened his eyes. This baby isn't just upset. He's in pain. And no one up there knows how to listen. But as quickly as certainty came, doubt followed. What if they laugh at you? What if they accuse you of touching someone's baby? What if the billionaire has you removed from the plane? He glanced at the curtain separating classes. A solid, literal division between worlds. George returned to his seat, shoulders trembling. Will arched his back and screamed harder, turning a deeper shade of red. A woman in the neighboring seat pressed the call button furiously. "This is becoming a safety issue," she snapped. "Someone needs to do something." George looked down at his son. "This is my fault," he whispered, voice breaking. "I don't know what you need. I don't know how to fix this." For 3 hours, he had tried to overpower the situation with logic, with money, with tools. But Will's cries ignored them all. They weren't calling for a solution. They were calling for connection. In economy, Owen felt his heart begin to pound. Not with fear, but conviction. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Do not ignore pain that you are able to heal." The cries intensified, turning desperate. Owen stood. The passenger beside him looked alarmed. "Where are you going?" Owen didn't reply. He stepped into the aisle, eyes fixed ahead, his mind clear. He knew what he was about to do might change the course of his life forever, either in disaster or destiny. And with that first step toward first class, fate moved with him. Owen pushed aside the heavy blue curtain separating economy from first class, stepping into the aisle with quiet determination. Instantly, all eyes locked onto him. The atmosphere snapped taut like a wire. A businessman in a pinstripe suit shot out of his seat. "Hey, you can't be up here. This isn't your section." A woman clutched her designer handbag protectively. "Security! Someone stop him!" The lead flight attendant rushed forward, palms raised. "Sir, return to your seat immediately. First class access is restricted." But Owen didn't stop walking. His gaze was locked on baby Will, thrashing, red-faced, gasping between screams in his father's arms. Will's tiny body was overheating. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. It wouldn't be long before his nervous system began to shut down. Owen's voice was steady. "He's not just crying. His vagus nerve is overstimulated. If you don't decompress it, he could—" "Enough!" the businessman barked. "Stop with your nonsense and get back to— Let him speak!" The words didn't come from Owen. They came from George Courtney. The billionaire stood, face drained of color, eyes dark with exhaustion and something far rarer in him: fear. The flight attendant froze. Passengers fell silent. George's voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, save my son." He held out the baby, not as a billionaire commanding the world, but as a father surrendering everything. Owen stepped forward, lifting Will carefully from George's trembling arms. The moment their skin met, Will screamed even louder, a piercing primal wail that sent murmurs of alarm rippling through the cabin. A woman covered her mouth. Someone muttered, "This is insane." Another passenger whispered, "He's making it worse." Owen closed his eyes. He didn't hear their doubt. He only heard the rhythm of the baby's distress. He positioned Will upright against his own chest, aligning the baby's heartbeat with his own. One hand supported the base of Will's skull, the other pressed gently into the pressure point along his spine. Then Owen hummed. Not a lullaby. A deep rolling resonance, ancient, steady, vibrating through his chest into the child's trembling body. At first, Will writhed harder, fighting the unfamiliar sensation. His screams rose, louder, sharper. Passengers flinched. George staggered back, hands over his mouth. One more failure, he couldn't take it. Then, just as suddenly, the screaming stopped. Will's tiny fists unfurled. His breathing slowed. The baby's head dropped gently onto Owen's shoulder. And for the first time in 3 hours, there was silence. No sobs, no fussing, just peaceful, rhythmic breathing. The entire cabin exhaled as one. A woman in the back row began to weep softly, whispering, "That's impossible." The businessman who had shouted earlier slowly sank back into his seat, eyes wide in disbelief. The flight attendant lowered her hands from her face, speechless. Owen kept his palm firmly on the pressure point and continued the low hum, not to calm Will any further, but to stabilize the rhythm of his nervous system. Baby Will's lips parted, and he smiled. George Courtney's face collapsed, not in shame this time, but in overwhelming, disarming awe. His voice trembled. What did you do to him?" Owen lifted his eyes, the hum fading from his chest. "He just needed to be heard," he said quietly. "Not with words, but with heartbeat." No one spoke. Phones that had been raised to shame the billionaire slowly lowered. Because what they had all witnessed wasn't just a baby calming down, it was a miracle. And in that suspended moment, 38,000 feet above the earth, the balance of power shifted forever. For a long moment, there were no sounds aboard the plane except the steady, gentle breathing of baby Will nestled against Owen's shoulder. George stared as if witnessing a law of nature rewritten before his eyes. His knees buckled, and he lowered himself into his seat with the slow caution of a man afraid the moment would break if he moved too suddenly. "How?" George's voice was barely a breath. "How did you do that?" Owen looked down at the peaceful infant, then back at George. His reply was not delivered with pride or mystery, but with truth. "Your son wasn't crying because he was uncomfortable," Owen said softly. "He was crying because he was alone." George blinked slowly, confusion twisting into irritation. "Alone? I've been holding him for hours." Owen shook his head gently. "You were holding him, but you weren't with him." A ripple of bewilderment passed through the watching passengers. "What does that mean?" George asked, the old sharpness returning to his voice, a billionaire accustomed to measurable, actionable answers. Owen took a calm breath. "A baby's heartbeat syncs with the person holding them. It's how they regulate emotion and feel safe. Will couldn't sync with you because your heart wasn't open to him." George's jaw tightened. He had faced hostile boards, government inquiries, savage press conferences, but nothing had struck him like those words. "He doesn't know me?" George said rigidly, almost accusingly. "It's not that he doesn't know you," Owen corrected gently. "It's that he can't feel you." The words reverberated through the cabin like a bell. "He can't feel you." In Owen's memory, the sterile light of a hospital room flickered. His mother, her skin pale from chemotherapy, held a newborn at her chest. "Do you hear that, Owen?" she whispered. Her crying changed the moment I held her to my heart. Not because of my arms, but because my heartbeat said, "You are safe." Young Owen, tears streaming silently, asked, "What if the mother is afraid?" His mother brushed his cheek. "Then the baby will be afraid. Babies don't borrow our words. They borrow our nervous system." The infant let out a soft sigh and fell silent. "Remember this," his mother murmured. "Babies don't cry to be heard. They cry to be felt." Owen gently transferred Will into George's arms. The billionaire hesitated, as though he were being asked to hold a miracle made of glass. "Keep him against your heart," Owen instructed. "Not like cargo, like he's reaching for you." George swallowed hard. Slowly, awkwardly, he pressed his son to his chest. Will stirred, but didn't cry. Every muscle in George's body tensed. His breathing became uneven. "Relax your shoulders," Owen murmured. "Breathe with him, not against him. Let him match you." George inhaled, trembling. For the first time, he wasn't bouncing or shushing or fixing. He was being. The cabin watched, spellbound, as the titan of industry, known for ruthless efficiency and emotional detachment, held his son like a man discovering fatherhood for the first time. Will's tiny hand opened and rested over George's heart, as if claiming what had always been his. George's vision blurred. A single tear slid down his cheek. In the silence that followed, something far greater than a baby had been calmed. A wall within a man had begun to fall. And seated across from him, Owen Ross, poor, orphaned, overlooked, had just spoken the one truth money could never buy. Connection is the first language of life. For several heartbeats, no one in first class moved. It was as if every soul aboard that aircraft understood they had just witnessed a turning point, not only in sound, but in spirit. George Courtney, who had never in his life asked for help without a contract attached, gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Sit," he said quietly. Owen hesitated, unsure if this was an invitation or a command. But when he looked into George's eyes, he didn't see authority. He saw need. Owen sat. Flight attendants silently adjusted the seatbelt sign, cleared unused champagne flutes, and backed away, as if acknowledging that a different kind of negotiation was about to take place. George held Will against his chest, carefully maintaining the positioning Owen had shown him. The billionaire didn't speak right away. When he finally did, his voice was low, stripped of presentation and power. "Who are you?" "Really?" Owen looked down at his hands. "Just a kid with a one-way ticket." George didn't accept that answer. "You did something no expert could. That wasn't instinct. That was knowledge. Where did you learn it?" Owen took a slow breath. "From my mother. She was a neonatal nurse. She believed every newborn carried memory in their heartbeat, and that if you listened long enough, they would tell you what they needed without a sound." George studied him, absorbing every word. "You speak about emotions like a physician speaks about medicine," he murmured. Owen shook his head. "Medicine fixes the body. Connection fixes the soul." For a moment, George simply watched Will's sleeping face. The baby's cheek lay warm against his chest, something that had never happened before, not even once in 6 months of life. "My entire career," George said slowly, "has been built on one belief. People are liabilities. Emotions are distractions. The moment you feel, you lose leverage." "And has that made you powerful?" Owen asked gently. "Or alone?" The question landed like a stone in still water. George didn't answer. He didn't need to. A sudden jolt shook the plane. The lights flickered. A collective gasp swept through first class. Will startled awake, his face contorted. Owen prepared to reach out, but George lifted a hand. "I've got him." He repositioned Will the way Owen had shown him, baby upright, chest to chest. He steadied his breathing, kept his shoulders relaxed, and pressed gently into the pressure point along Will's spine. The baby squirmed, but didn't cry. Then, softly, unbelievably, Will sighed and melted back into sleep. Owen watched, eyes widening with quiet pride. George stared down at his son in wonder, as though seeing him for the first time. "I did it," he thought. "Not with wealth, not with force, but with presence." And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. A man who had conquered corporations became a student of a boy the world overlooked. George turned back to Owen. "I've built empires," he said slowly, "but I've never built a bond. If my son couldn't feel me, tell me, Owen, how do I begin?" Owen didn't answer with strategy or science. He answered with truth. "You listen, not with your ears, with your heart." For the first time in his life, George Courtney sat in silence and allowed someone else to lead. For the first time since takeoff, peace settled over first class. It wasn't just the silence of a sleeping baby. It was the silence of emotional gravity. Something sacred had happened, and everyone on board felt it. George Courtney sat very still, his son resting calmly against him. After a long moment, he turned to the boy beside him. "You said earlier," George began, "that you were on a one-way ticket, that you were heading to London for a humanitarian scholarship." Owen nodded. "But why this flight?" George pressed. "This route is nearly impossible to book last minute, especially for a scholarship seat." Owen hesitated. His fingers drifted unconsciously to the pendant hanging from a leather cord beneath his shirt, a small carved stone his mother had given him before she died. "I wasn't supposed to be on this flight," he said quietly. George's brows knit together. "My original ticket was for a flight leaving tomorrow morning," Owen continued, "but it got canceled because of a system glitch. I thought I missed my chance." "So how did you end up here?" George asked. Owen looked out the oval window, clouds drifting beneath them like silent witnesses. His voice softened to a near whisper. "My scholarship coordinator called. She said, 'Take any flight you can, your destiny will find you.'" He turned back to George. "This was the only flight available. One seat, in economy. And when I stepped onto the plane, I felt something." "Something?" George echoed. Owen nodded. "Like I was being pulled, as if I wasn't choosing the flight. It was choosing me." The words hung in the air, weighty, undeniable. There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. A soft voice from behind interrupted. "Excuse me." It was the elderly woman from row 2, the one who had earlier glared at George in irritation. Her eyes were wet with tears now. She reached out, resting a trembling hand on Owen's arm. "You didn't just save that baby," she whispered. "You saved all of us." A businessman leaned across the aisle. "My wife had a panic attack last year because of a screaming baby on a plane. I was about to... I don't know what I was going to do, but I was losing it. You stopped me from becoming someone I didn't want to be." Others murmured agreements. A young mother with her own toddler pressed her hand to her heart. "I've never seen anything like that. Who are you, really?" Owen looked down, humbled and slightly uncomfortable under the attention. "I'm no one special," he said softly. George stared at him. "No one special doesn't calm a baby in agony with a touch. No one special doesn't stop an entire cabin from unraveling." Owen shifted in his seat, his eyes glistening, not with pride but with memory. "My mother used to say," he whispered, "we don't choose where our gifts come from, but we choose whether to answer when they call." He glanced down at baby Will, now sleeping peacefully against his father's chest. "I guess today I answered." George swallowed hard. In his world, everything had a price, a contract, a reason. But in this moment, none of those existed. There was only truth. Was it coincidence? Fate? Divine intervention? Or was it something even greater? Maybe, in a world of power and ego, Grace had decided to board a plane, in the form of a forgotten boy, to remind the richest man alive what truly mattered. The seatbelt sign chimed on as the aircraft began its descent into Paris. The cabin, once a battlefield of nerves and judgment, now felt like hallowed ground, every passenger quietly absorbing the gravity of what they had witnessed. Baby Will slept peacefully in his father's arms, one tiny hand clutching the billionaire's suit lapel as if it had always belonged there. George Courtney gently adjusted his son, then turned to Owen with an expression so unguarded it seemed to soften the very air around them. "Owen," he began slowly, his voice unsteady, as though he were speaking a language unfamiliar to him. "What do you want most in this world?" Owen blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever asked him that. Not like this. Not with intent to listen. He looked down at his backpack, frayed and small, holding everything he owned. Then he looked at baby Will, no longer crying, no longer afraid. "What I want," Owen said, voice barely above a whisper, "is to build a place where no mother watches her baby suffer without help. Where no infant cries for hours while a parent feels helpless. A center that trains people, not just doctors but everyday caregivers, in how to truly understand an infant's needs, to create hope where there is none." He paused, the weight of his dreams filling the air between them. "A place like that could have saved my mother," he finished quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then George drew in a sharp breath, almost a gasp, as though the truth Owen had spoken pierced through layers of steel that had encased him for years. Slowly, deliberately, George turned in his seat to face him fully. "Then I won't just fund it," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I want to build it with you." Owen's eyes widened. He stared at the billionaire in disbelief. "I don't mean a donation," George continued. His gaze held Owen's with unwavering intensity. "I mean a partnership, a foundation, a global institute born not from wealth, but from what you carry." Owen's heart pounded. Powerful men always wanted something. Nothing came without strings. "You don't need me," Owen said carefully. "You could build it yourself." George shook his head, clutching his son more securely. "No," he said softly. "I could build a building. I could hire experts. I could buy technology." His voice wavered. "But I couldn't give it soul." A stunned silence enveloped them. "For the first time in my life," George continued, eyes glistening, "someone showed me what my money can't do. And what a human being can." Owen looked away, overwhelmed. Emotion trembled in his chest. Hope, fear, disbelief, purpose. "What if I fail?" he whispered. George gave a small, broken smile. "Then we fail together. But we fail doing something that matters." There was no manipulation in his tone, no ego, just truth. Baby Will stirred in George's arms, then settled again, his tiny heartbeat steady, safe, certain. Owen exhaled softly. This wasn't charity. This wasn't pity. This was something his mother had told him about in her final days. "One day, your gift will knock on a door you never expected. Do not hide, do not run, say yes." Owen turned back to George, and in that moment, somewhere between sky and earth, he made the decision that would alter both of their destinies. "I'll build it with you," Owen said. George shut his eyes, as if releasing a lifetime of burdens. When he opened them again, there were tears. But this time, they were tears of beginning. The wheels touched down on the Paris runway with a gentle thud, but to Owen, it felt as though the entire world had shifted upon landing. The cabin lights brightened. Passengers unbuckled seatbelts with newfound reverence, glancing at Owen not as a stranger, but as someone they would remember for the rest of their lives. George Courtney stood, cradling baby Will with the tenderness of a man reborn. For the first time, his movements were not mechanical or forced. They were natural, human. As they disembarked, George's security detail and assistants were already waiting on the jet bridge with military precision. The billionaire nodded toward them, but to everyone's surprise, dismissed them with a quiet wave. For now, it was just George, Will, and Owen. They walked together through the private terminal, footsteps echoing softly against marble floors. Outside the tall windows, Paris shimmered gold in the late afternoon light. Then, Owen's phone buzzed. He expected a message from his scholarship coordinator, perhaps instructions for where to meet his escort in London. Instead, the words on the screen stunned him motionless. "Notice. Due to emergency funding reallocations, your scholarship award has been revoked. Your enrollment is no longer guaranteed." It felt as though the floor vanished beneath his feet. Owen stopped walking. Scholarship revoked. No flight to London. No school. No future. He stood in the middle of the terminal, surrounded by wealth beyond comprehension, holding a phone that had just erased his only escape from the life he came from. His chest tightened. His vision blurred. Behind him, footsteps paused. "Owen?" George's voice softened. "What is it?" Owen swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "My scholarship. It's gone. They pulled the funding." He lowered the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. I have nowhere to go." For a moment, silence. Then George slowly handed baby Will to the waiting nanny and took a call that had just buzzed through his earpiece. It was a call from his board in New York. Urgent, high priority. He stepped aside to answer. Owen stood frozen, mind spinning with panic. Was it over before it had begun? Had fate brought him this far only to abandon him at the gate of his destiny? The call ended. Footsteps approached. Owen turned. George Courtney stood before him, not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a man who had made a decision. His eyes were clear, his expression resolute. "Owen," George said, voice firm yet gentle, "do you still want to build that center?" Owen's breath caught. "More than anything." George extended his hand. "Then forget the scholarship," he said quietly. "You don't need it anymore." Owen stared, stunned. "I'm not offering you a chance," George continued. "I'm offering you a partnership, a legacy. Not tomorrow, not someday, now." His voice steadied. "Owen Ross, do you want to change the world with me?" The terminal went silent. Owen looked down at the outstretched hand, then at baby Will, now peacefully gazing at him from the nanny's arms, a tiny smile on his lips, as if he recognized the person who had saved him. And in that unforgettable moment, Owen understood. This was not the end of a flight. It was the beginning of a calling. Next episode, the boy from nowhere steps into a world built to keep him out, only to discover he was sent to transform it from within. Thank you for watching to the end. I believe you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting stories like this lined up for you already, so click the image showing on your screen to watch the next. Don't forget to subscribe.